Hurry up and subscribe to the channel. The link is in the description. The story is written based on real events. This story, at first glance may seem fictional and rather unusual, because everything that I'm going to talk about a little bit further down the line is going to sound, frankly, completely absurd. However, it remains for me to do little else to warn you, dear listeners, of the following contrary to common sense, and thereby equip you with information, so that you will be able to notice and notice any oddities occurring in your home, and also to secure your life. This whole nightmare dates back to the unfortunate day when I decided to move from an apartment building to a private sector home just outside of town. There were many reasons for this, and I don't see much point in explaining them. I'll just say that for a long time I've had a tempting idea of owning my own separate lot with a 2-story house and then have a full, happy family and plant a tree, symbolizing the beginning of prosperity for the whole family. Thanks to the right experts, I was able to find a suitable plot in no time. I was able to find a suitable plot just 10 minutes away from my work, which was very convenient and practical. Since the price was in line with the quality, I didn't hesitate, and as soon as the realtor and I double-checked all the necessary documents, we immediately signed a purchase and sale agreement for the house and land. I was overjoyed because I was finally had a corner of my own corner, which was not ashamed to brag to show off to my friends, relatives, and co-workers. The housewarming party was great, and I didn't realize that so many loved ones would show up, turning a boring, dull into a real, fun party followed by a hangover in the morning. Of course, after such a huge party, it took a lot of work cleaning up the house. But since it was a Sunday afternoon, and there were no other more important things to do, I was glad to get on with the task of cleaning up the house, while scrutinizing every room in my comfortable abode. There were 8 in all, for on the first floor, and as many on the first floor, unless, of course, I should the attic, which I didn't want to go into in any way. Speaking of the attic, the former owner had advised against storing small valuables in the attic, as the local squirrels had a tendency to magically get under the roof and steal whatever they could get their hands on. In fact, it was not uncommon for them to make a lot of noise, climbing up and down all sorts of beams and the roof itself, which often frightened the previous owner and occasionally called the police. Of course, the news of the rodents, but the price of the house, and the house itself completely overshadowed this and other minor disadvantages, which, if necessary, could be easily remedied. By the time I had completely gone through all 8 rooms and shined almost the entire house, it was late evening, and I needed to go to bed, for I had a hard week ahead of me. So, having dragged all my personal belongings to the pre-selected bedroom on the first floor, I peacefully began to prepare for sleep, anticipating the second quiet night in the purchased house. As it often happens in a new place, I fidgeted in bed until the early morning and could not sleep, periodically catching small rustles from somewhere in the attic. Keeping in my mind the words of the former owner about the annoying coppers under the roof, I tried not to pay much attention to this barely perceptible noise, and only by about 4 o'clock, having made enough of it, I was finally able to sink into the sweet embrace of sleep. However, I did not manage to sleep as long as I would have liked, because by 8 o'clock I had to get up for my favorite work, which was mercilessly reminded by the alarm clock for several minutes. That very morning I began to notice the first oddities and some changes in the environment, which at first I wrote off to my forgetfulness and fatigue. First, while taking a morning shower, I accidentally noticed in the drain, though small, but still a piece of a woman's black hair, which was not there on the day of cleaning. A little later, having cleaned the bathroom again, I went to the kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast and coffee, the only thing that always helped me to wake up properly and stay awake in the office. When I opened the refrigerator, I was, to put it mildly, a bit taken aback with amazement and a sense of impropriety. A whole quarter of the pizza that had been left over from the day of my loud housewarming party had magically vanished, even though I remembered that I hadn't touched it until at least this morning. And if the above mention could still be attributed to my inattention, I could not find a logical explanation for the watch, which I had left on the nightstand near the bed. As all the doors and windows were securely closed, and the valuables, except the watch, were still in their places, I at once dismissed the obsessive thought of possible burglars who had broken into the house late at night. Therefore, I did not dare to call the police, and after a while, loaded with various bad guesses, I went to work. It is not without reason they say that when you are engaged in an interesting case, time flies unnoticed, and you simply get lost in space. This is especially true for work, which personally never let me get bored. I returned home in the evening pleasantly tired and ready for a good night's sleep, this time without any fidgeting and other stupid rituals that supposedly help you fall asleep quickly. However, as fate would have it, my meeting with the warm bed that evening was a little delayed, because of another wave of strange phenomena that had apparently occurred during my absence. Already from the threshold, thanks to my impeccable memory, I was able to notice without much difficulty some changes in the interior of the house. I was confused by the interior doors, or, to be more precise, by their condition. Some of them were tightly closed, though I remembered leaving them slightly ajar before I left, which, I confess, gave me the creepy idea that I wasn't living in my house alone. As my opinion about all paranormal and other mysticism was extremely negative, I immediately assumed that there was probably some animal in the house, because nothing else came to my mind. Before I went to bed, I decided to check all the rooms for any uninvited guests, but after a thorough search of both floors, I was unable to find any trace of the intruder. On my way back to the first floor, I stopped for a moment in the corridor and looked at the tightly closed attic hatch, the mere sight of which made me uneasy. It had already occurred to me that the cause of all the trouble might well be up there, but once again I remembered the words of the previous owner about how he had called the police several times because of his silly superstitions, which of course could not find anything but small rodents crawling under the roof. These memories slightly calmed my imagination, and soon I was tired enough to go back to the kitchen to have a hearty dinner and get ready for bed. The third night in my new home was surprisingly quiet, and I even managed to get a good night's sleep, which contradicted my busy schedule. By tradition, having taken a cold morning shower, I immediately went to the kitchen, where the dishes, unwashed since yesterday, were waiting for me, which I had decided to leave for today because of my wild fatigue. But what was my surprise, when instead of dirty plates and cutlery I saw absolutely clean sink and neatly stacked dishes, as if someone at night decided to clean up after me and not to leave everything as it was. I checked the valuables and the doors with windows, through which it was possible to get into the house, and again made sure that it could not be strangers from the street, because the locks had been replaced by my familiar masters immediately after the move, and therefore no one else possessed the keys to the front door except me. My thoughts were actively confused, and I couldn't understand who the hell was running my house while I wasn't around. The closed doors, the watch left on the table, and the hair in the drain were one thing, but the washed, neatly stacked dishes that I'd left dirty last night had put everything in its proper place. The only thing that complicated the situation was the absence of a crime, as our valiant law enforcers would hardly believe in my stories about the miraculous cleanup in the house, as well as the mysterious disappearance of food from the refrigerator. So I firmly decided that I had to take matters into my own hands, and being on my way to work, I stopped by the first electronics store to buy 3 digital video cameras and try to film everything that goes on in the house at night. I had been on pins and needles all day, and none of my colleagues could understand what was going on with me, and I didn't even want to explain anything to them, to be honest. No one would have believed me anyway, so it wasn't worth wasting my precious time on idle talk. When I got home in the evening, tired after a hard day's work, the first thing I did was turn on all 3 night vision cameras. First in my bedroom, right on the windowsill, a little later in the kitchen, and in the hallway of the second floor, where I could see the hatch leading to the attic. I immediately covered the whole thing with rags and towels, so that they could not be seen during the coming night, even by an armed eye. I don't know why, but that night my mind was instantly calmed by the thought that I would be able to capture, if not a ghost, which by the way would be nice, then at least a small intruder living under the same roof with me for free. So, after the usual procedures, I went to my room to sleep, feeling like a real ghost hunter. In the middle of the night, at about the 3rd or 4th hour, I don't remember now, I woke up to a loud sound coming from the kitchen, as if someone had deliberately dropped a bottle on the floor, and then disappeared into the gloom of the building as if nothing had happened. Of course, I reluctantly had to leave my soft bed to see if everything was okay, and if I should even sound the alarm. When I reached the kitchen, I noticed a bottle of mineral water lying on the floor, not long ago peacefully standing on the windowsill. After a brief glance at the untouched, camouflage chamber in the farthest corner of the kitchen and putting the bottle in the refrigerator, I decided to go to the restroom when I got up, and then, with a relieved soul, headed back to the bedroom to get the remaining hours of sleep before rising. With the first alarm clock beeping, I jumped out of bed, and the first thing I did, without even eating breakfast, was to collect the footage from all 3 cameras, so I could look at the footage my assistants had shot that night on my laptop. After what I had seen, a chill of fear ran down my spine, making me nervous and making sure that I was not alone in the house. The following is the footage from the cameras, which, by the way, I still have with me. To believe or not to believe in the truthfulness of my words is up to you. 2.15. The camera installed in the corridor on the second floor picks up a suspicious muffled sound like footsteps, as if someone is wandering in the attic, not at all embarrassed by the fact that the true owner is still in the house and has not gone anywhere. A distinct noise is heard for the next 15 minutes, after which there is silence for some time. 2.47. The same camera in the second floor corridor clearly shows the hatch door opening silently, and someone leisurely sliding the wooden ladder to get downstairs. Just a few minutes later, after a few simple steps, a female figure in a light-colored sweater and long pants was first seen looking around in a hurry. Apparently, the woman was listening to see if the host had woken up after her exit or was still asleep. 2.53. A video camera camouflaged in the kitchen recorded a female figure with long black hair slowly entering the room. In this shot, I noticed that the stranger was wearing a strange mask of an unidentified animal on her face, as if she was aware that she might be filmed. After a couple of glances in the direction of my bedroom through the doorway, the woman boldly pounced on the refrigerator and began to destroy the edibles I had bought, and then, apparently, having eaten to her heart's content, sat down directly on the table, and so with about 5 minutes continued to stare thoughtfully somewhere in the direction, probably thinking about what she and so interesting to do next. I in an instant, sharply shifting her gaze to the windowsill, the unwanted guest unreasonably but confidently went to the window and pushed the bottle on the floor, and then, quickly grabbing a kitchen knife, as if a misbehaving child on tiptoe, ran away from the kitchen, hiding in the darkness of the corridor. Then, a few minutes later, I appear in the frame, and there are already familiar to you actions. I briefly look at the camera, put the bottle in the fridge, go to the toilet. 3.11. While I was in the restroom, a stranger with a kitchen knife in her hands boldly entered the room and, after looking around a bit, climbed under the bed, patiently waiting for my return. 3.45. This is probably one of the creepiest moments of the whole night. The crazy woman, and I can't call her anything else, heard me sniffling and crawled out from under the bed and started staring at me, still holding a sharp knife in her hand, just in case I woke up. She stood like that at my bedside for exactly an hour, obsessively watching me sleep, and then, apparently bored with this pointless activity, the stranger tiptoed to my closet and hid inside it without a single rustle. 7 o'clock in the morning. The alarm clock rang, and when I woke up, I immediately went to the camera and turned it off, already anticipating to look at the recording, but not yet suspecting that someone was sitting behind my back in the closet right now with malicious intent. A barely perceptible creak of the door from somewhere behind me prompted me to take decisive action. Remembering about the traumatic pistol lying in the dresser just in case of fire, without much thought, I instantly pulled out the weapon and, turning around, made 3 clear shots in the chest on the already swung knife maniac. She fell dead on the floor, and I, meanwhile, shocked to the utmost, rushed to the living room, where the phone was, to call the authorities for help. At that moment, when the squad was already halfway to my house, I gathered all the will in a fist, decided to go back into the bedroom to check the object that caused me wild fear, or to be more precise, his condition. But what was my surprise when I found that the room where the stranger had been lying motionless just a few minutes ago was empty. Since it was the first floor, she easily escaped through the window, forcing me to sit nervously at the front door with a gun in my hand until the police arrived. The squad arrived just 15 to 20 minutes after my call to the emergency services. I still remember how we searched my house together with law enforcement, and how we found foreign things in the attic in the form of a dirty sleeping bag and a backpack with all sorts of junk with no ID. Her identity, alas, could not be established, which, however, was not surprising, given the way this woman lives illegally, like a bum, in the homes of strangers and eats their food while the owners are away or asleep. After this blatant case, I wondered if I was the only one who had fallen victim to such a parasite, which unobtrusively sucked on other people's homes. And what I recently found on the internet, to tell the truth, dumbfounded me, involuntarily forcing me to share my story. It turns out that after the economic crisis of 2008, there was a staggering increase in the number of people who began to notice that strangers were secretly living in their homes. This was evidenced by strangers' belongings being accidentally found, usually in attics, basements, or any other uninhabited rooms that the owners often didn't use. It was also not uncommon for some homeowners to capture uninvited guests on a hidden camera, after which they usually disappeared from their lives forever. For example, here is a real incident that happened in Japan in 2008. A lonely man for many days could not understand where the food he bought from the refrigerator disappeared until he installed a video tracker in the kitchen. It captured an unfamiliar girl climbing out of the pantry and eating his supplies with gusto, without even thinking about the consequences. Or let's not go far and go to Russia, where near Moscow a man lived at the dacha of an entrepreneur for about half a year. However, when he went out of town for the weekend, the guest had to hide in the attic. It all ended with the fact that the dependent decided to go to the bathhouse and accidentally burned it down. Arriving firefighters, he explained that he was a housekeeper, but they did not believe his words and called the police. Bottom line, the aforementioned slackers call themselves frogmen. The name itself comes from the word frog, that is, they seem to jump from one house to another, constantly changing their place of residence, as soon as the owners begin to notice something strange. There are harmless representatives of this subculture who try not to interfere with peaceful residents and lead a completely hidden lifestyle. Unfortunately, however, there are also those who, in addition to food and shelter, want to feel on the edge of the abyss, or in short, they want wild adrenaline. Today, frogmen all over the world are creating entire communities. In addition, they are gaining a huge fan base by describing their adventures or live streaming. And if you are suddenly the lucky owner of a large two-story house, I believe it would not be superfluous to check the attic or basement. It is extremely likely that there, it is you who will be able to discover something new. Thanks everyone for watching. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more exciting stories. Take care.